and from the Learnovate Centre. So if I can introduce Keith.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr Qian Xiao, Assistant Professor in the area of Technology and Education in the School of Education here in Trinity.
And Chen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Qian Xiao. I'm Research Fellow in the Human Plus Fellowship, and Vin is my supervisor. Yeah, we'll go dive into my research later. Yeah.
And Peter.
Hi, Peter Gillis, Innovation Team Lead at the Learnovate Centre, Trinity's research centre dedicated to technology enhanced learning.
And we're delighted for Peter to chair today's discussion. So the idea is to have short presentations and then a chance for everyone to ask questions and have discussions. So Peter, do you want to just introduce?
Sure. So, so my function here today is actually ears open most of the time. So very interested, obviously, in the topic here today. And very pleased Vinny's asked me to join you guys here today. The chat is about debate. We're looking forward to questions coming in, both from those on Zoom and from those here in the room, because we're at very early stages of looking at this topic. So, it's all open. Please contribute to the conversation. So, as Vinny mentioned, we're going to have 3 talks, and Keith is going to start us off basically looking at, from an educational perspective, the promise of technology, where are we at, and specifically then taking a bit of a deeper dive into AI in that space. So Keith, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Peter, for the introduction, and delighted to join this tech talk this afternoon alongside Vinny and Chen. And my input is it's around setting the current interest and emphasis on AI in education in the broader context of interest in technology in education. As was drawn on my experience as a teacher educator with a particular interest in technology adoption and technology policy for schools. I'm hoping to use this historical and policy-based perspective to identify some lessons which may underpin and inform our current consideration in respect of AI in education. I'll also share some definitions of AI, detail some broad categories of possible AI use within education, and draw attention to what I see as some key challenges or considerations in respect of AI in education. So when we consider the history or trajectory of technology in education, we typically reference 2 waves. The first wave premised on the coming of the microcomputer in the early 1970s, and the second premised on the coming of the internet in the early 1990s. And each of these technological interventions or catalysts were accompanied by hype and expectation, re how they were going to enhance and, in the perspectives of some, transform education. So the expectation regarding the potential of the microcomputer and the second wave, the internet, some of the expectations I've noted on this particular slide. The first around, the possibility for better learning, reflected in the first wave in an expectation for better student performance on standardized test scores. And in the second wave, this shifted somewhat to an expectation for broader educational outcomes, such as enhanced student motivation and engagement. Secondly, an expectation for more student-centred learning and for greater personalisation of learning, with an emphasis on active constructivist pedagogies rather than the established transmission approaches. There are also some more transformational perspectives and discourses evident, such as the fact that technology might replace the teacher, and that technology could be a trigger for changes to fundamentals of the system, the long-established organisational features of formal education, such as the unity of time and place, the school, the classroom, the curriculum, and the presence of a mandated or set curriculum. However, in spite of these transformational expectations, it's largely accepted that technology has by and large been assimilated into existing structures and practices. And I reference here the SAMR model for technology adoption, which distinguishes between enhancement and transformational levels. And substitution is referenced at the enhancement level. And the 2 images here provide illustrations of that type of use. So key commentators such as Larry Cuban and Neil Selwyn have drawn attention to technology's uneasy relationship with education and how, for a range of philosophical, ideological and practical reasons, successive technologies have not had the extent of the impact envisaged by some. However, I contend that the last 50 years or so haven't been totally in vain, that based on the experience of attempts towards technology adoption, we can identify a number of lessons which may inform future efforts and potentially in respect of emerging technologies such as AI. I reflect some of these in a recent paper which contends that we can identify trends or phases across policies aimed to support the adoption of technology in schools, and that more recent phases reflect a greater level of pedagogical maturity than was the case previously. In essence, informed by previous not so successful attempts, we now have a greater understanding and appreciation of the complexity of technology adoption in schools and education. Firstly, we now have a greater understanding of the significance of the human actors, the teachers, the school leaders. Earlier attempts reflected a more technocentric understanding that the technology itself was a catalyst for change or improvement. That simply we put a computer in the classroom and that sort of magic would happen. Secondly, attempts to embed technology were often driven by actors and stakeholders external to education and underpinned by political and economic reasons. We now have a greater appreciation of the importance of co-creation based approaches and of the coordination of various stakeholders in what is a fragmented and complex educational landscape. And thirdly, we know that technology adoption and implementation is not straightforward and linear, and that implementation and adoption is significantly contextually bound. So school culture, existing practice, the wider school ecosystem, including the influence of key players, all have a significant bearing on the version or interpretation of technology that's enacted at the school level. So finally, and I suppose in effect, the summation of the previous points, we now know that technology adoption is complex and takes time. And the Gartner hype cycle, as presented on the next slide here, we're probably familiar with that, and we know that it's intended to represent a technology's life cycle, but it also provides a reasonably accurate representation of the trajectories of technology within education, with the need for time and learning reflected on the maturity axis. So that brings us to AI. And I think we can reasonably contend that AI represents a third wave of interest in technology and education. As we know, there are other emerging technologies, as they're referred to, including the realities, including virtual and extended reality. There's also significant interest in robotics currently. But AI is receiving the greatest level of interest and attention, in my view. And like with the previous technologies, we can see the hyperbole and expectation evident in some of the literature re how it might solve all the problems of education. We also have those who very legitimately draw our attention to the significant issues and concerns which surround AI, particularly issues relating to ethics and privacy. However, in rationalising somewhat the competing perspectives, I'm thankful for the diplomatic and good counsel of Janrik in 2017, who, as per this slide, advised that rather than asking whether in 50 years' time there will be a human or a robot teaching, we should be asking what kind of combination of human and artificial intelligence we will be able to draw on in the future to provide teaching of the very best quality. So like with a lot of issues and opportunities, we need to find a middle ground. We need to eke out what opportunities there exist for AI to be utilised in ways which enhance education whilst being mindful of and addressing our legitimate concerns. So that brings us to the next slide, which addresses what we mean by AI. And this is no trivial or straightforward question, and many understandings and definitions abound, including the two that I've included here from McCarthy in 1956, who I believe was the first to use the term, and more recently from Baker and Smith in 2019. And personally, I find it useful to think of AI as any machine or application which can simulate intelligence. So, the idea of simulating, is significant or important to me. Obviously based on the significant underpinning data and the related algorithms and so on and so forth. The definitions here, I think, are significant for two reasons. Firstly, they indicate that artificial intelligence as a concept is not actually something new, although most of the emphasis on it has been in recent years. And secondly, that there is no one universally agreed understanding or definition of it. And this understandably poses challenges to having a shared and common understanding regarding it and communicating re it. So put simply, it's difficult to pin down exactly what we mean or understand by AI. So that said, the possibilities regarding AI in education tend to be categorised or framed in three main ways, and there is general agreement re these. So firstly, the student or learner supporting means of AI, teacher supporting, and thirdly, system supporting. Student or learner supporting is what we typically think of as constituting AI. So intelligent tutoring systems which adapt to learner performance and provide feedback. Other examples which are learner facing can make learning more accessible, such as language learning and translation tools, automation of subtitles and voice to text. Teacher facing or supporting tools are those which can automate some routine teacher tasks, such as provision of marking and feedback, identification of appropriate resources based on learner characteristics, often referred to as recommender systems, and the identification and diagnosis of problem-based areas based on student activity or performance. System-facing tools relate to using data across schools. So, within, for example, a national system of education, to identify, for example, trends in assessment performance, to inform resource allocation, and to support guidance-type activities. And in addition to these three areas of learning with AI, the EU in a recent publication also suggests learning for and learning about AI, in addition to more general learning about our learning processes. So finally, I'm going to address what I see as some of the particular challenges of AI adoption in education. It's obviously not an exhaustive list, but addressing these kind of areas may go some way towards smoothing the path of adoption. Firstly, I think we should aim to reach some sort of shared understanding of AI, recognising that it is not a single technology, but a range of technologies and methods, and what its affordances and limitations are in certain contexts. Also, what pedagogical approach or theoretical underpinnings is it informed by? There is an idea that AI is something which it's a bit out there, and I think we need to demystify this as a step towards making it meaningful and accessible to educators. Secondly, I believe we need to address the fear factor around AI. And for me, this is twofold. It's firstly around alleviating the concerns around data privacy and ethics, the perceived risks related to AI in education. And secondly, around trust in the data and modelling on which AI-based platforms are based, recognising that AI is only as good as the data and the modelling on which it is based. We also need educator input into the modelling, recognising that AI has mainly been a maths, engineering, computer science-based discipline to date. And finally, I think we need to develop the accessible platforms and applications to make teacher and educator engagement with AI tools possible, in an easy and meaningful way. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a million, Keith. And what I'd say is possibly if you have questions for Keith, possibly hold them, and we'll work our way through the talks. First, Keith, just drawing on your slides there, I think the words that I personally resonate is this idea of external actors. I think that's a huge aspect of it. They have black hearts in an awful lot of these situations, and they're not interested in the rigor, which you also brought up, and the co-creation. And to me, that's the three that I think really resonate there. So, so moving on from Keith's fantastic insight into possibly where we are right now, what we want to do is move on with Vinny to have a look at, say, well, okay, there's the stage for us, but where can we go from here, and what might we be able to do moving forward? So, Vin.
Great, thanks, and thanks, Keith, for setting up this. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm just sharing my screen, I think. Is it sharing? One second. Zoom. Sorry, 1 second. How about that? So that's been shared now. So what I want to do is go a slightly different direction and say, okay, well, what about AI? What's it transforming? What is it really like? Where is it working? Where is it not working? Because we know it's not working in various places. And then arrive at where Keith is and say, well, okay, what way does that connect into education as we see it? So first thing I'd say is it's impacting in all sectors of society, from education to healthcare, from social to governance. It's really changing the way we work today. A lot of the time it's under the covers. A lot of the time you don't actually know it's working on behalf. But on the other hand, there is a number of tools-based AIs where we can actually control it. I take the example is that most people believe they understand how to use a car, how a car works. In fact, they don't, because the car has multiple computers in it and multiple very complex engineering. But they have two or three pedals in the steering wheel, and that's we then now know how we can control a car. We haven't reached that stage in AI yet, but that's where we need to go. We need to go to where the AI is working for us, but also where we feel we're in control of it. So where is it going at the moment? Well, certainly in healthcare, probably the ones we're seeing most of is image analysis, really being able to pick out abnormal tissue cells or abnormal images and be able to quantify them and be very accurate in terms of training. Again, it's all in data driven, and it supports and diagnostic support. I would say that one of the things about AI is a lot of times when people are developing first AI, they try to make AI automated decisions all the time. And actually, I think that as humans, we don't always appreciate that. I think as humans, we have a skill to bring and a decision to make. And so how can AI be more shaped to actually help us as distinct from to automate, which then becomes difficult for us to actually use when it maybe isn't as accurate as you want it, or we want to intervene in a different way, or where we have more context, which changes our decision. If we take AI in financial sectors, it's really been focused in very successful areas: fraud detection, risk analysis. Again, the positives, really good at recognizing things. Slight negatives, sometimes it's too fast in the sense that it can make an adjustment and then all of a sudden that adjustment makes another, and all of a sudden you get a jitter effect. And actually understanding that actually the speed at which it makes decisions is one of the reasons why you can't partner with AI. You cannot be a complete equal with AI because it'll always think faster than you. So either you're in control or it's in control. And once you understand that, actually, then you can actually collaborate with it. So we need to think a little bit about that. Anyone interested, really good book by Ben Schneiderman on this particular issue. In agriculture, we're seeing it in farmland monitoring, in yield management. Again, it's the idea that it doesn't matter what the media is, AI can understand it and transform it and make data on it and then make decisions or suggest decisions. In social entertainment, my own area is personalization. And I have to be careful in the sense that personalization can be really powerful. I'll talk a little bit later about how it's been used in education. But it can be really powerful. But again, it comes with health warnings. If you personalize in an echo chamber, you can change people's and polarize people. So what happens is if you have someone in a social media environment and you give them one message or one set of values, they will gravitate toward the center of that. Then if I increase one side to the right, for argument's sake, you'll gradually begin to move right as well. Before you know, you've moved down the spectrum. And I can do with others, I can move them up the spectrum. And that's what happens when social media polarizes. And we've seen that around the world today, where you would normally see a full rounded 360 opinion. In fact, you're getting a diet of very specific opinion where that solidifies perhaps bias. So it's a really, really powerful thing, really, really good, but it's got to be carefully used and implemented. And then in the workplace, we're seeing it more and more. Conversational agents are probably one of the things that most people are beginning to become aware of. These are the bots that you're seeing on websites and so forth. They're quite fragile at the moment. Take 2 or 3 interactions and then it says, I'm going off to get somebody. But in reality, they are becoming stronger and they will become much more commonplace in the future. And performance analysis is again, looking at everyone's performance and looking at how it can intervene to support. What are the fears and concerns? Well, one of the fears that was articulated before was making humans as appendages for the computer, whereas somehow we're being managed by the computer. We're being managed by AI. And that's what the image is looking to indicate. I would argue this is most of the time it's poor AI. It's poor deployment and poor implementation or malevolent implementation. It can be a way in which people might want to introduce it, but to be honest with you, The movement now is more towards human-centric AI, where the human's design and problems and issues are in the center, and you shape the technology to really empower the human. That's where the drive is at the moment. The second thing that people worry about is displacement of jobs. And in fact, that AI perhaps can do certain things faster, more efficiently, more cheaply. And the answer is that that is true in certain circumstances. But that was true when the computer was first introduced. That was for every technology wave, that's been the same problem. What's actually happened is we've created more employment because it creates new jobs at higher levels. It also creates new opportunities. So yes, it's transformational, but the wave goes with it. The standard comment is in the 1920s, the greatest number of people employed in a specific role was as a bellhop in a lift elevator. We don't have them anymore, and we don't really want them anymore. People were worried about that. So there are some jobs that actually should be retired, and I think that this creates more opportunity. Last part is, does it get in the way of the humans? And this is probably the key thing going forward. And this is one of the things that we're kind of bringing out in this talk, is that actually it's really important that AI understands the stakeholders and works with those stakeholders and for those stakeholders, as distinct from trying to automate those stakeholders. And that's frequently where the technologists feel, oh, I'll solve this problem, rather than actually getting the interdisciplinary team around the table to actually shape the solution in a way that actually is sustainable and actually will work. By 2023, 47% of all learning management systems will have AI embedded within it. So it's coming anyway. The question is, what is it doing? A lot of times when they say it's AI, it's still rudimentary. It's basically data analytics, it's statistics, and a plus. But it is coming in. It is analyzing and transforming content. It is enhancing the engagement with the learner or with the tutor or whatever. And it is looking at that data and governing it in certain places and making it secure. The kind of things we're seeing now is learning analytics, so people can analyze the performance, competency modeling and assessment, meaning that what are the skills that you're trying to engender, and how does that map to what the course was originally trying to achieve, and looking at the combination of the two. So I'm just going to admit somebody here. Personalized and adapters, where I work. And really what people, in case you're interested, in personalization, what we're looking at is, we're not necessarily saying everyone has totally different objectives. They can have different objectives, and personalization can support that. But even if you all have the same end goal you're looking for, your learning path might be different. And that's because your prior knowledge is different. That's why your learning preferences are different. Each learner is individual. And what we actually have seen, and I've done it for the last 20 years, doing different experiments on it, the weaker learners benefit the most. That tail in the class really begins to shift. Why? Because they get the support they need and the attention they need. Where actually it's the top performing students, unless you are careful in terms of how you implement it, they won't benefit as much, because they're probably good learners, or they're experienced in the area. They will learn anyway. What we do know is that with personalization, we can push them further and suggest more advanced topics so that they stay involved, but they can go further. So it's about lifting all boats, but certainly the impact we're seeing at the most is in the lower 50% of the class. I include immersive technologies as part of AI because it can't exist without it, and it's using the same technologies underneath. We're seeing multiple forms of immersive technology, and we're only beginning to really understand the effect of immersion, both in terms of engagement, in terms of the immediacy. If I take one example of video-based immersion, it's not even 3D now, just video-based immersion. The behavior of individuals, even though they will say, I will behave this way, I will always do it right, when they're in the environment and they're talking to effectively video, they actually revert to the normal behaviors. And we can see that. So it's very, very useful for particularly any sort of immersive skills and human skills in terms of learning. Game-based, as we said, and these virtual chatbots and so forth are coming. And I'll just re-emphasize what Keith said earlier. We tend to think of them as those tools which are student teaching, which is really designed to support the learner directly. Those which are supporting the teacher, which in terms of diagnostics or management and so forth, and those overall looking after the whole overall educational system. Things like the data mining for resource allocation, diagnosis of learning difficulties, all of those sort of difficulties. And we're really seeing, like the Nesta report came out in 2019 now, Education Rebooted, exploring the future of AI in schools and colleges. And that particularly looked quite deeply at what was working and what was just beginning to work, and how we can ensure that we get where we want to go better. The OECD report in 2018 also looked at future of education and skills. And it looked through this idea of student assistance, diminishing the gaps between different socioeconomic groups. This is what AI can support 24/7. Providing access to knowledge and information for disabled students and those with additional learning educational needs, personalized learning, individualized learning, and supporting collaboration. From the teacher assistants, it's changing the nature of what's taught by the teachers, but also assessing and monitoring the student progress in conjunction with the teacher and planning future teaching and interventions. And again, it's there to support the teacher. It's not there necessarily to take over from the teacher. And the other thing that's important here is that we know that context is king in this situation. The context of the learning becomes really, really vital. And AI may not know that context. That's why in those situations, you do have a tutor to be able to intervene. One of the things that's fundamental, anyone who's studied education has seen this, Biggs's constructive alignment. But the idea that in any course you develop, the learning outcomes need to be in sync with the teaching methods that you're applying, which are consistent with the way you're assessing. And you've got to think of that triangle anytime you're designing an educational intervention. Different people look at different ones, but one of the things we're going to look at today is how can we re-look at and re-evaluate assessment? Because currently assessment at the moment tends to be very skills-based. We tend to focus on what are the skills we're trying to learn. We actually think that that's one place where AI can really begin to have an impact. So whether it be formative assessment or a recognition of patterns of learning, it has real potential. Where the pitfalls, you've got to watch out for bias. Keith said that earlier. Too much trust in automation. As people have seen, where the AI systems can generate essays on particular topics and have been actually submitted by students and corrected and given marks. So we do have to be somewhat, and also there's this balance between surveillance and assessment. When I was explaining to people how AI works, whereas it's monitoring what you're doing, that can be creepy. As a learner, do I really want to? I need trust and I need transparency to know what is being looked at, and do I have the right to have it wiped, or is it just for that educational experience? And they are all your rights. That's under GDPR. So within education, we have to be very careful about this. We need to be transparent and explain it, and we need to have the human in the loop, and we need to have the context of that learning embedded, because the AI may not know about that context. They may know about the learn or whatever, but an experienced teacher will say, oh yeah, but that always happens at this stage. Actually, I will worry about that later, or whatever it might be. So there's room really there for enhancing from the teacher's perspective. I'm going to wrap it up there. I don't want to take too much time, but it gives you a feel for what AI can do, where the pitfalls are, and I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you so much, Vinny. And again, just going back to your earlier point about the way other industries have absolutely leveraged these AI systems, and it's just that there is still that work to be done in ours. I know that the old slide used to show the car and the operating theatre, and say the mechanic and the surgeon from 100 years ago wouldn't know what to do in those environments. Yet if you put them in a classroom, they'd say who painted the blackboard white and then get on with it. So we haven't really leveraged it as well as we might. So thanks a million. And now I'd like Qian to share her research now on an innovative approach on how to actually move on from Vinny and what he's sharing with us into some practical research around how we can do deep assessment in self-directed learning environments.
Thanks, Peter. My part of the discussion will focus on the third wave of AI innovation and human-centric AI, just now we mentioned. So specifically, we'll look at the state-of-art deep learning techniques and how we can leverage these techniques to develop new assessment methods in self-directed learning. And what we call here is deep assessment. So following the convention of Tech Talk series, I would like to start with one question. That is, does good learning practice always lead to good learner performance? So in other words, do we always find that good score students always have the good learning habits and the poor performance students have the very poor learning habits? So why do sometimes we found some students seems to perform really well with less work? And what do they do in common to contribute to their learning efficiency? So to answer all these questions, we really need to look at the learners' behaviors and specific from different aspects, and to see whether we can find the differences and the commonality among these learners. So as an attempt to figure all these questions, we did a case study in self-directed language learning. So where we have the learners use a mobile phone app and to learn English. So the mobile phone app will have the intelligent tutoring system inside where it records all these users' actions. And here's a quick example. It's for one particular learner, we have the system will record at a specific time stamp. And this learner answer which questions and whether it's correct or not, and when did that happen. So the number of all these actions, even for one particular learner, can be very large. For example, here for this one learner, we have 40K records of these actions inside the system. And here I put another histogram for just one specific skill. Here is a bar. The bar chart in this figure represents the number of the questions he did the weekly basis. And the green part are the number of the correct answers, and the blue part are the wrong answers. And the line chart are the correctness rates. So two observations here. First of all, we can see that the number of the questions this learner did is very irregular. Sometimes he can do like 300 questions a week, sometimes just not at all. And also the performance level in terms of accuracy is also not very steady, right? Sometimes up and down. So typically, in whatever system, we have very different learners with very different behaviors. We have very active one, actually, just now what we saw, that is tend to use the app almost every week. And we have the learners start very intense practice in the beginning and stop a while and restart it. And we also have the learners that only use the app very occasionally. And we have learners only practice only a few weeks or 1 year and a half. So now the question is, given all these kind of very different learning habits, how can we assess the learners? And next, we're going to see how deep learning come into the story and can help us to derive new assessment methods. So the first finding I put here, actually derived by our deep learning model, is one view for 10K students here. This is what you can see the 3D model, and one point is representing one student, and the color is the average score. So let's look at it more closer in this bigger picture, in this bigger figure. And what we can see at, first of all, we can see the color gradient here. Recall that the color represents the average score. So roughly we can see on the top students. At the bottom, the purple one represents students with the lower scores. And another thing is that so I put the four learners we just showed, and we can see that they are locating very different positions in this model. And specifically for the last one, which is the user 88151, is located very far away from the majority of learners. Because we believe it's because he practiced far less than the average learners in the system. And here I also split the histogram into three different kind of aspects, so we have better clue about what happened. Again, this is like the first column is weekly correctness rates, and the second is the count of questions, and the third is the week number of the practices. And we align them with the same axis. We can see the curves from the shape. We can see they are very different. And so how did we derive such a model? The key idea behind what I call it organic search with artificial intelligence. Why it is called organic? Because there's no human labels is needed inside this deep learning model. By that, I mean that we don't need the predefined rules what do good learner look like in the modern process. So it's fully automated without additive human bias. In this, that we can provide a very different, a very complementary perspective for assessment. And so what the deep learning model do is actually purely just digest all these observational behaviors and compress them into low dimension space where we can visualize all these patterns, and this pattern just like appear organically in this space after the deep learning model like digest all this information for us. So a second finding of our model is that we can use what we call the progress vector to identify the richness of behaviors. Recall that in whatever coordinate system, a vector is defined by two ending points, the start and the end, and the direction. And we find back all the learners along this direction and to see their behaviors. So here are two quick examples. It's two group of learners. The left side is the learners with a degraded performance, and the right side is the learners with improved performance. So again, one row is one learner. So let's look at the left side first. So what we can see is on the top learners, the performance, the first column, when we see that very carefully about all these curves, we can see the trends are very smooth. So from the top, the performance is almost flat, and to the bottom, we can see the learners actually having kind of the trend of a dropping performance. And so back to our questions, do good learners always have good learning habits? And the answer, of course, here is no. Let's look at the very bottom one on the left corner and the bottom one. And so we can see, even though the average score is actually quite high, I think 0.8, but we can see very clearly the trend of the dropping performance. And again, on the right side, we can see another set of the learners with all improved performance. If you look at the first column, the correctness rates. And again, back to our question, do poor performance learners always don't have the bad habits? The answer is not really either, right? So let's look at the bottom right side corner. And even though these learners have very poor average score, but we can see from the behavior point of view, it's very good even like compared to the top one. So back to our theme, human-centered AI. So what we've seen just now is the capacity of our deep learning model, where we see that the AI algorithm knows everything but understands nothing. So it knows everything about the student behaviors, but it understands nothing about the context. And what it actually do is just compress all this information of behaviors into compact visualization so we can try to figure out. That's why we really need our human instructor in this loop, in this tutoring loop, which we call human in the loop tutoring methods, where we have this AI human teacher model. The AI will help our human instructor to find attention back. in the sense that helping them to find out who are the learners that need help. And so that the human instructor can find out the problems in terms of, for example, the family, emotional motivation, and try to do the proactive intervention for the students. And hopefully we can see the kind of feedback with the AI visualization after they do the intervention. So in terms of application, really depends on the different contexts. We put the three types of users here. For the teachers, teachers know the specific type of skills and also overall context of the class. So the goal to integrate such deep learning models is try to help them to amplify their productivity and help them to broaden the learner potential. And for the learners, the context is different because each learner knows their own situation of motivation and the emotional factors, right? So the goal of integrating such deep learning models is to building, for example, more gamification mechanism for them to build better confidence. And for educational researchers, because they know in terms of one set of the experiments, they know the learner and teacher's context. So the goal of integrating deep learning model can be good for the pedagogical design. And so last but not least, the caveats and the pitfalls. And apparently that's what we've seen, that there's a lot of behaviors are measured inside the system. So we really need the transparency when using the deep learning models. And second of all, we mentioned again, and the context is very important to get the interpretation of these behaviors. And the third of all, the visualization and the communication of such a method to different audience, to teachers, learners, researchers, really need very different mechanism and the AI models, this interface to design for them. Yeah, I guess I will stop here. So we can open for discussion for more details.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Qian. I'm conscious of time, so I think what I might do is see if there are any questions in the room, potentially inspired by this. Yeah.
I have a question for everybody, but I'll start with Qian. I know one of the limitations that you had talked about, your list wasn't exhaustive, but I wondered if you foresaw financial constraints, because one of the comments that the professor made in his talk also was just the idea that it improves socioeconomic backgrounds. I think that, again, is only when you have access to computers and if you have the money. So I think that would be sort of part of one of my questions in terms of, do you foresee financial constraints being something that we can overcome to help us to integrate AI better into education? And secondly, my own research deals with teacher training with technology. And just what type of training do you see teachers receiving for AI? Because there are some areas that were discussed about ways that it helps the teacher, but I strongly kind of have reservations with the idea that educational researchers know what they're doing. I think practitioners know what they're doing. And as a practitioner researcher, I find my voice is often asked for, but rarely listened to. So that's why I'm putting out my own practitioner research quite a lot. But I'd like to hear just a little bit on those aspects if you have time.
Yeah, you go first and then I'll cover.
So I mean, the rather than a sort of a list of sort of limitations, so on, it was more kind of a list of issues I think we need to consider as a kind of a path towards smoothing what we might decide is the appropriate adoption of AI and so on. Certainly, I mean, I think finance is an issue in terms of AI adoption, but I would say at the minute that it is something that is high on an EU kind of policy agenda. So, as part of the EU Digital Education Action Plan, for example, there's reference to, AI within that. Recent, kind of publication as well around sort of very recent, actually, in the last couple of months, around guidelines for ethical use of AI and data within education and so on. So it's likely that within those kind of contexts that some level of funding will follow. But certainly, I think the finance is an issue. We know about that already, even in terms of our experience of kind of technology, even within different school demographics on foot of COVID and so on, and the measures and so on that we needed to put in place for some students to make sure that they had access and so on. So we know there's variation there, and that's at the school level, as well as kind of maybe issues as well in terms of funding, in terms of at the more kind of system level and so on. So I do think funding is an issue, but I'm sure as well Vinny will tell us that those with a commercial interest and so on are ready and willing and already kind of funding in terms of the technology development part of it as well. And then in terms of sort of the teacher education aspect of it, I mean, certainly, if we are to implement AI within our formal systems of education, we know that teachers are key to all of that. So, certainly then as part of their development of their digital competence, as it gets kind of referenced, they need to develop familiarity with AI. There's a need for them to develop, to almost kind of win their hearts and minds in a way around it, if it's to be adopted. So they need to see the potential of it.
Yep.
So I would say as well that they need to have kind of positive experiences with it. I would suggest as well that, as a good way of kind of sketching out a trajectory for, what might promote school level adoption, we should maybe focus more on the teacher supporting aspects of AI than we have to date, where, as I said, the emphasis has been more on the learner, the learner supporting and so on. But certainly I would sort of see as, teachers needing to have, experiences with it, as a way of kind of, framing their own attitudes, their own knowledge, and potentially their own implementation around it. And they need as well to be, empowered in a way to make their own judgments as well. So, it's not just about kind of providing them, with the tools in a way. I think they need the broader perspective as well as part of their broader digital competency, so that they're in a position to make judgments that are, context related.
So I just add that I think co-design is one of the key things here. And you are absolutely right in the sense that it's not enough for technology researchers and educational researchers to sit together and work out the solution. The stakeholders in there are the practitioners, are the people who are managing, whether it be schools or university or whatever the environment might be. And I think that's whole human-centric, stakeholder-centric approach, interdisciplinary approach is the one that actually in a lot of AI research we're now pushing very hard in the DAP Centre and in other centres as well. Because then you shape the technology to suit the problem as distinct from shaping the technology to suit itself. I think the other part that also connects then into, well, what does that mean in terms of the skill sets of the teacher who will use it. Again, the analogy of the car is really important. At the moment, the teacher is kind of the mechanic, but no one's ever trained them to be a mechanic, and we don't want to train them to be a mechanic for a car. So why would you? So what we want to do is we want to create the tools where you have control. The teacher has control, but not necessarily have to know every part. Has transparency and confidence that it's actually doing what it wants it to do, and can intervene if it's not. The other key things that has to happen. And that's not always been the way. We've seen in the past technology failures where the whole thing's been rolled out because it worked very well in a lab, and all of a sudden you're in front of a classroom with students and so forth, and the whole thing just falls apart. Or the teacher's not feeling confident, very polite, use it for the first lesson, and then parks it in the corner and never gets used again. There's loads of those examples of where technology is introduced. So I think we've learned a lot more about that co-design, and I think that's where this is at. I think the last part is, I don't think the teachers need to have to know everything about AI to be able to use AI. Mm-hmm. And that's important. But we do need to be able to give them the controls necessary to be able to be in control of it in the right place. So I'd answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. Conscious of time and spreading it as well. We have a question here asking, Chen, is your work language and subject independent, or has it the capability to be?
Yeah, I would say yes. Because if you look at the model, it's also like independent of context. So it's very generic. Now we're testing the capacity of the model. So we're not try to test in any context, but it sure will be the next step that we're hoping that whether we can apply these models to a specific like language learning or specific subject, and to see whether it work in the real world setting. That's definitely the next step. Right now, what we discussed today are mostly about very theoretical modeling, and it's very generic because you can add very different features inside as long as you can convert it into numbers. So basically, the neural nets just digest the numbers, so whatever you can fit in, and it try to compress that for us. Yeah.
So just to add to that, so the data that Qian's work was based on was a language learning app, and it was looking at multiple dimensions at the same time. So it was looking at skills set and scores in questions on particular skills. It was looking at the intensity of the learning, and it was how often you were using it, for how long, and what was the so it was looking at different dimensions of the learner behavior as well as the learner performance. And it's one of the first times that they'll combine together and visualize together to actually give a picture of the students or the learner's performance, both as a learner and as the skills that they were achieving, which, you know, we always talk in education about the notion of we can measure the skills, but are they a good learner? Well, they might be a good learner, but are they learning the skills? And this is the one way we can actually now combine it. Where it's particularly exciting is that the nets and our approach and Qian's approach of representation is dimension expansive, meaning that as we identify other dimensions of behavior in the data, we can add that too, if we so wish, and see what it's like. So it's really quite a powerful tool to examine in a single visualization what is actually going on.
Yeah, but given what we know about language learning research from the past, Dornay has done this extensively with motivation. We know that learners have temporal phases of motivation. So are we getting more data to confirm what we know? Like, was the research findings sort of surprising to you in that sense? Or is it just, well, we knew this, but now we know this really deeply?
No. What it is actually it's combining those different dimensions in one place. And what we were doing in this particular study was to first say, can we actually separate that behavior? So what Qian's work has actually shown is we can use this as a differentiator, as without any labeling of the data, without any manual work. We can actually differentiate the different learners and the behaviors in one go. So that's new, right? So the question then is, well, do you want to use that just to analyze language learning? Well, yes, you can, and we can do that work. But we're actually interested more as a tool for examining behavior and performance. And so now what we're looking at is trying to apply that same tool set to loads of different other learning courses and performance of learners' behavior.
Thank you for your presentation. So continues this question. So as a future educator, so I have two questions. So is there significant differences between learning from AI teacher that by the app? I mean, we're talking about only language subject right now. So that through the AI system application and the teacher actually, have you ever done any find out any significant differences between learning same subject, same language, for example, from the teacher and the AI? So we need the huge gap that's the beneficial of learning from AI. That's the first question.
I think that's a very good question. So actually, the answer is hopefully we actually really want to do it. But the thing is, there's technical challenges. Is we do need huge amount of data to figure out what we can do, and those data are not very easily to be found. And so that's why we've seen here, and even for that, actions are not very concrete, right? So but we do hope that the first actually we've checked is the existing series that's in language learning, and we for example we tried the difficulty level. We try to figure out whether like we can see those series that just in our models again. But the answer is that it's not that easy because as we see, the behaviors are very different. So what happened in reality is you filter, and in the end, you don't have so many students. And so from a statistical point of view, it's not significant anymore. And so we do hope in the next step, we have the human tutors coming, so we can have some control of the experiment, so we can have kind of scientific evidence for that. Yeah. So that's hopefully answer your question.
Yeah. And one more question. So speaking of the subject that you were focusing on, the language teaching subject. So will the teacher be in the future replaced by AI? Because as you mentioned, the teacher, you don't have to know about all the AI systems that you have to know just for how to control it. So which means, for example, that there are 10 teachers in the university and you don't have to have, the university doesn't have to hire like 10 professors. It will be like one professor controlling the AI system, and then like 9 will be replaced by the AI, and then one professor will control and then teaching the subject. And then, for example, if it happened in the future, so which subject will be replaced like the most, fast, easy?
Oh, okay. So
Like it's like history.
so the first one is it potential that would an AI tutor replace lecturers? It might if you tried to scale it. So, for example, if you were dealing with thousands and thousands of students, then the traditional model where you had local tutors doing the follow-ups and so forth, one could imagine a situation where AI would be able to allow that to scale with less people involved, less tutors involved. However, I would be uneasy about the idea that, well, actually you'll just replace them completely, or just one with thousands and thousands, unless you're going to a distance ed model, and that's a different sort of teaching model. So you'd end up changing the teaching model. AI can support that, but would it automate that? Possibly not. The next question is which subjects would it replace first? The interesting part is that language learning at the moment, if you look at Duolingo or whatever, they're not going to make you fluent. They're going to get you kind of a way of getting through it. So when it comes to the deeper skills, those things don't go all the way. What you can do is use immersive environments to practice, but you still then have the pedagogy part. So I still say it's going to be a situation where there will be still human tutors and environments where participants can practice, can talk to avatars who understand that language. We can do natural language recognition, and they can speak back. So they can practice and be much better at it, but it doesn't mean it replaces the teacher. What it does do is replace the design of the course to make use of those technologies. And that's what I meant about when you start looking at that assessment piece, now the constructive alignment, and start changing that changes your learning practices and also enhances your outcomes. So once we begin to unravel one of those pieces, then we begin to move the whole thing forward. So that explains what we get. Is that okay?
Time for one last one. Yeah. So we have Denny asking, building on what we've been talking about, views on what you believe would help advance this type of research and understanding of pedagogy around the areas of with, for, and about AI. So I think that's a nice, yeah.
Yeah, so what type of research is it?
Yeah, so I gather the research that's being undertaken is the future of business schools or management education and looking at organizational readiness. But then, if we're going to talk about enhancing and developing that practice, how can we start to introduce that?
Yeah, I'll let you take it and then
to me, there's a couple of things here. The first is that the affordances that AI gives us allows us now perhaps to look at the pedagogy again. We've been using pedagogies that have been around for the last 40 years. The affordances of AI now allow us to maybe develop new pedagogy that's much more dynamic, new pedagogy that can analyze things faster and then make reactions and make interventions available to the tutor, or practice environments available to the students, depending what the skill is. So I actually think that what it can do, it can enhance our understanding of how in this digital world, in this immersive world, how students can learn better. So I think that, again, it's about taking one of those points on the triangle of the constructive alignment and really beginning to change that, and that will change your learning practices, and it'll also change the outcomes that you can actually achieve. And to me, that's where the research needs to be done, and that has to be interdisciplinary. The last thing you want is a computer scientist designing pedagogy. It doesn't work, and I've seen it loads of times. On the flip side, it's difficult for an educator to really understand the impact of the AI, and this is why this area really does need that change now. And there is an opportunity to really think in terms of, well, what would be the pedagogy that would change here? What would be the assessments that would change that can make the learning more effective, more efficient, and more satisfying? Those are the three things we want.
I would add to it by saying I do think there is a gap currently in terms of assessment, particularly in terms of, most of our education systems have now moved to curricula that have, in addition to, your traditional subjects and your content and so on, you now have aspirations in terms of kind of key skills. I think we're still at the stage of kind of working out how we kind of, assess those kind of key skills in really useful and meaningful ways. I think there's potential for AI to have a positive role in that regard. And I think that's an area that is, ripe for, for potential research, as a way then of kind of, moving the area forward. So it's a gap within education, assessment of kind of key skills. There would seem to be kind of potential there in terms of AI, in terms of, as a means of helping us, reconfigure assessment or think about assessment in very kind of different ways, I think in a way, like we know as well about the significance of assessment within education and how it influences, everything that happens in terms of kind of teaching and learning and so on. So, I think there's the potential for maybe a kind of a happy marriage there.
Yeah, and I think, skills are usually overtly displayed through behavior. Yeah, so I think to your point, there's huge opportunities there, given that it is overt behavior for machine learning to come in and support that level. Yeah, I'll wrap up. We have a question there asking, is there tech around assessing either performance or motivation? I'll just say yes, please talk to me about my research. But given that we're at 14:04, I'd like to thank Keith, Vinny and Chen and you all and everybody online for joining us today. Fantastic debate. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, Vinny.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just wrap up now to say my thanks to the panel. This is our final discussion of Human Plus Tech Talks for this semester. But please stay in touch. Our plan is for in the new year to launch some new Tech Talks and to have more deep sessions on each of the areas that we've touched on. So again, thank you for your presence today. Thank you for being part of the debate, and I hope you found it really useful. I know we did.
And this recording will be available.
As will the slides. Thank you very much.